Just 3 hours away from our Colorado State University campus, Roosevelt National Forest is 800,000 acres. It is managed along with the Arapahoe National Forest and the Pawnee National Grassland. Those included make it over 1.5 million acres of protected area. I decided to research Roosevelt National Forest because I have a big family connection to that area. Located within the forest, there's a little town called Eldora that my family's been traveling to for generations because of a relative I have that built a cabin during the Colorado Gold Rush in the late 1800s. So it wasn't declared a national forest at that point, but it's important to recognize the entire history of the forest. For 13,000 years, indigenous tribes were stewards of Roosevelt National Forest. The two main Native American tribes in the land that is now Roosevelt National Forest were the Ute and Arapahoe tribes, and they would travel there in the wintertime to follow the elk. The Ute and Arapahoe weren't evicted for the creation of the protected area, mainly because they were forced to leave in the previous decades. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864 is what caused the Arapahoe to leave Colorado, and other tribes were continuously removed as westward expansion brought homesteaders, loggers, and miners. Ute were evicted in 1880 and moved to reservations in Utah. In terms of the actual establishment of the PA, the area was declared the Colorado Division of the Medicine Bow in 1906 by Theodore Roosevelt, with its headquarters here in Fort Collins. The aforementioned loggers were actually relocated in the years before to create the protected area, and it's clear that not everyone was happy about this resettlement. Nearly 200,000 acres were added to it, and then in 1910, this portion was renamed the Colorado National Forest. It changed names finally again in 1932 when President Herbert Hoover signed an executive order to change the Colorado National Forest to Roosevelt National Forest in honor of Theodore Roosevelt's efforts towards conservation. Back when it was the Medicine Bow National Forest, many stakeholders were involved, and people from Colorado Agricultural College and other institutions advocated for people to be evicted from the lands to create the protected area. The motivations for this was an increased awareness of the need for watershed conservation and a need for timber management in the forest. Timber was especially important because of its demand in both the mining and railroad scene. Roosevelt National Forest cannot be found on the IUCN database, but the fact that resources were still to be extracted from the land, but management was needed to make sure it was done wisely, makes this an IUCN Category 6 protected area. In all of its beauty and wonder, there are several direct threats to the protected area, including mining and natural resource extraction, damage to watersheds, the invasive pine beetle, overcrowding of visitors, and fire. I will be focusing on fire as it is a major current issue throughout the West. While fire is a direct threat, it's also, in a way, an indirect threat to the forest because when fires in other protected areas occur, it pushes an increase of visitors towards Roosevelt National Forest. This increase of visitors increases the risk of fire because of misuse of the park and people not obeying fire restrictions. Another indirect threat relating to fire is actually knowledge itself about fire. The reason so many large wildfires are occurring out west now largely has to do with 1, the long history of fire suppression in the west, and 2, climate change causing a drier, hotter environment that creates these perfect conditions for fire to spread easier than it would have otherwise. In the early 20th century, increase in consumption led to the concern that there wasn't enough resources such as lumber to keep up with this growing demand. So the Forest Reserve Acts were created, and so fires were suppressed to let trees grow. Smokey the Bear, an iconic character, was later created to further suppress fires by spreading a message that fire is bad. This campaign was useful for the time as timber was very important for World War II. But these attitudes about fire lived on, so there's this underlying cause of cultural belief that all fire is bad. And the protected area has seen this threat recently as the Cameron Peak Fire, as well as the East Troublesome Fire, burned part of Roosevelt National Forest last year in 2020. There are now post-fire mitigation strategies happening to restore the areas burned and to improve the watersheds. This leads me to the part of, okay, so we have this threat, now what is actually being done to manage fire? In addition to this very long and extensive management plan that includes management for Arapahoe National Forest and Pawnee National Grassland, there are other projects and policies and plans put in place. So there are several planning tools. First would be sustainable use. Something within sustainable use is what visitors can and cannot do in the park. And we see this in this forest with campfire bans. The planning tool of risk and management systems, the USDA Forest Service site shows that Roosevelt National Forest has several groups ready to respond to a wildfire, which includes the Roosevelt Hotshot Crew, which is highly trained firefighters based in Fort Collins, a heliTAC crew, a dispatch and aviation crew, and also the Jeffco Air Tanker Base. Additionally, there's a 2021 fire operating plan for Grand County, which includes Roosevelt National Forest. And on pages 12 to 13, it explains the response to unplanned fires. The tool of planning legislation is a big tool for Roosevelt National Forest. There are many projects and policies that I found, but a few key ones to focus on. The first one is there's actually a project happening right now to prevent the threat of wildfire, which is the Magic Feather Prescribed Burn, and its purpose is to reduce fuels, improve wildlife habitat, and improve ponderosa pines and mixed conifers, and retaining old growth qualities. The end goal is to have 6,329 acres burned, and they're still currently working on it, and in early October they did burn over 200 acres in 1 week. And this is also important because it helps reduce other threats like the invasive pine beetle. Then there's the Forsyth 2 project of 2016, which is actually revised after an initial Forsyth project in 2014. And this one was scaled down to meet public concern about it being too large of a project. And in terms of reducing fuel, the goals of this project are to decrease the surface fuel on the ground and increase space between each tree and decrease canopy closure to less than 70%. Which will all make the fire hazard be in the low to moderate range instead of a high and very high range of where it was when the project started. As mentioned before, the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome fires did some damage to Roosevelt National Forest. For the areas impacted by East Troublesome, a piece of legislation, which was a decision memo, said that there will be rehabilitation in no more than 4,200 acres, and the rehabilitation will take place near adjacent private lands. They also decided to rehabilitate the land because of the watersheds that were negatively impacted by the fire. Now, I saw this as a theme in a lot of planning and restoration. It was very focused on areas near people and their private lands and livelihoods. Another important piece of planning is the environmental impact statement. This document explains the 3 fire regime types and explains the values at risk when fire occurs, the impacts of it, and prevention and mitigation. It also said in broad terms they manage fire by both planning for unplanned fires and preventing wildfires. 3 management zones were identified. These are actually being implemented within other legislation as they have shown up in the Forsyth 2 project. In that project, Zone 1 is 30 feet out from an important structure they want to keep safe. Zone 2 extends 100 feet out, and Zone 3, 300 feet. In the Forsyth 2 project, different types of trees are treated differently in each zone. There was a lot going on with these projects, but are they even successful? And the answer is we don't know yet, but there is hope. The Magic Feather Prescribed Burn is a careful but continuing project. The post-Cameron Peak and East Troublesome fire mitigation is still happening, and the Forsyth 2 did predict the success of their project. Roosevelt National Forest uses several principles. First, one that threats are inevitable and pre-planned responses are needed. Now, this connects with the risk and incident management system. In terms of the Forsyth 2 project, there's a chart that predicts the likelihood of fires occurring based on the fuel and other factors in certain areas. The next principle is community effort. And in the Forsyth 2 environmental assessment, it says that there will be a multi-party monitoring group. And this group would consist of a diverse group of stakeholders and would meet once a year at least to evaluate social and ecological effects of the project. There will also be monitoring of the project throughout the year. The last principle I will mention is systematic assessment of threats. This is seen in the aforementioned fire environmental impact statement, which it includes information for management of planned and unplanned fires, and also risks, impacts, and prevention. And some examples of prevention is prescribed burns, like the Magic Feather Prescribed Burn. All in all, Roosevelt National Forest is a beautiful place to visit, and it's important to be mindful of threats in the park and how history has impacted this threat that we're seeing today, and how we can better manage this threat so more people can enjoy the park and the ecosystem can maintain biodiversity.